Half the state, I don't think either.
But if
My understanding was
I
we're fine for
have
project.
this recording the entire.
We're not, so I thought about it.
But if you want. Yeah. Well, I don't remember that exercise when we're all learning, because literally we've never done. It'd be interesting.
You can just type it out.
Where's that?
There's not. All the projects.
There we go. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, Carl's already working on his master plan of one MPO.
Years.
5.5. I heard Ashland's thinking about breaking. MPO. So there's 3.
I had a city do that actually, in Florida.
I hope Carl's still on.
Okay, we're on for the recording's going.
Okay,
Okay. Oh, somebody else.
yes,
has to-
they're going to share. the screen.
Yeah, not yet.
You went first here,
Okay.
right?
Just letting people in. Okay, thank you, everybody, to our first triannual certification application review and workshop. The whole point behind this is to make sure that if you get federal funds, the best knowledge available. If a project comes in way under anticipated costs, people have to find more money somewhere, somehow, and that's a scramble for everybody. And the end result is ODOT doesn't look good because they're the only ones who can deliver federal projects around here, other than RVTD and Scott Chansey up in Grants Pass. The MPO doesn't look good because we programmed it and it was wrong. And the locals don't look good because you're telling your committees, your city councils or county commissions that we're going to get this done and you're not going to get it done. Wrong. Shop will not guarantee it isn't wrong. Let's be clear. Because what we're doing, trying to program for years starting in 2024, 2 years from now. And we're going 4 years beyond that. So by the time those projects come up, something will be wrong, guaranteed. Cost of materials, right away, something will be more expensive than anticipated. The whole point behind this workshop is to try and reduce those errors as much as possible. ODOT has been very kind to agree to work with us on this. Hopefully, all of you have some idea in mind as to what you're going to be applying for and what funds you're going to be applying for. For those of you that are just joining us now, first off, can everybody online hear me?
Perfect.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. We do not know how much money we have just yet. ODOT will tell us hopefully soon. It is not ODOT's fault, to be clear. The federal government passed a transportation bill last year. Congress didn't pass a budget until last month. So because they didn't pass the budget, ODOT couldn't tell us how much money we were getting. And once they do pass a budget, there's a whole bunch of stuff you have to look at in that budget to figure out how much A, the state is getting, B, how much the MPOs are getting. So we hope to hear from them soon. I can tell you one thing, it'll be more than previously. For CMAQ, it won't be much more because for CMAQ, Oregon gets additional $1 billion. That's over the life of the bill, 5 years, and that's to be distributed amongst 5 MPOs. So this MPO will see a little. We don't know how much just yet, but we're going to find So again, hopefully, all of you have taken a look at what you think you want to apply for. ODOT is very generously going to be here to answer your questions. They're going to provide a couple presentations on what you might consider, but hopefully they can answer any questions you have. One last thing, if you are intending to, well, two last things. First off, there will be no fund exchange. So if you're applying for federal funds, it'll have to go through the federal process, period. No exceptions this time. Secondly, if you're applying for CMAQ, please get your application in before the end of this month. We have to clear it through first. So if you're submitting an application strictly for or utilizing CMAQ funds, get it to us as soon as possible. The deadline for all final applications, May 27th.
I don't remember.
I think it's May 27th. That gives us June and July for this committee, the tax on both MPOs, to review and refine any applications and to get them submitted to their policy committee either in July or August. That allows us, the staff, to begin the air quality conformity determination once we have a list of projects. Any questions before I turn it over to Justin?
Probably should also note that there's two
Applications, you'd have to fill out the-
He's unmuted.
Only one application for CMAQ, that's the ODOT application.
Well, you're probably gonna want them to fill out both, right? If
Both.
Our application and
your
the
application
ODOT
and the
application.
CMAQ application at the same time, especially if they're gonna use.
If
two
they're
types
gonna
of
use
funds.
both funds, yeah. Yeah, there's an application for STVG online, and there's the ODOT application also online for CMAQ. If you're gonna split the funds, you gotta fill them both out. Yes, Carl.
The application for the RVMPO says it's for both on the introduction to it.
Yeah, we usually have them. And then
Yeah, you
now
had 'em fill
ODOT's
out
gonna
both.
have.
Oh, you mean for both, sorry, I thought we had corrected that.
No, we kept it that way because I thought we said we wanted to make sure our application still reflected the money.
Oh, that's true for the table.
Also
Yeah.
makes things a little bit more uniform on your grading.
Yeah. So there is, yeah, you'll fill out two if you're doing CMAQ, but that's Justin's fault.
I think that's fate.
Hopes.
Anything else? All right, Justin, Dan?
Well, first, I think we should go around and do some quick introductions and then our region manager, who will introduce himself, will have a couple words to say, but I'm Justin Shoemaker with ODOT. I'm one of the transportation project managers.
Dan Roberts, Transportation Project Manager.
Sean Eisma, Rogue Valley Transportation Planning Technician.
Paige West, Senior Planner, RVTD.
Ryan Nolan with Rogue Valley Council of Governments, and today I could be representing Jacksonville, Gold Hill, or Rogue River.
He's flexible. Carl Welsenbach, the Road Valley Council of Governments.
Brian McLaren, RV Cog.
Kelsey Sharp, RV Cog.
Eric Memmott, RV Cog.
Kristen May, City of Talent.
Wade Elliott, City of Grants Pass.
Alex Georgevich, City of Medford.
Joe Slaughter, City of Phoenix.
Joshua Bombard, DLCD.
Stephanie Holtai, City of Central Point.
Matt Samator, City of Central Point.
Dean LeBret, City of Eagle Point.
James Philp, Jackson County.
Charles Bennett, Jackson County.
ODOT Transportation Project Manager.
I'm Doug Sharp with ODOT, Region Environmental Coordinator.
Earl McNair with City of Medford.
Kate Sternberg, ODOT right. Rambleman, ODOT right away.
How do you want to run down it online?
We just start from left to right.
It's not the same for everybody.
Should somebody just say it out loud?
Yeah.
This is Neil Burgess, Josephine County.
Carl Johnson, City of Ashland.
Malia Beachside, Gold Hill.
Justin Burnt, ODOT.
Mark Riegel, City of Rogue River.
Leslie Orr, CAC member.
Rob Brandis, Josephine County.
Ian Holliker, ODOT Region 3.
Shelley?
Scott.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Scott.
Scott Chancy, Josephine County, from the transit manager.
Who's at the top left? Susan Clark, who's that?
City Grants Pass, Susan Clark.
Okay. And then
Susan Clark, City of Grants Pass.
Trent Carpenter,
Mike Kuntz.
Join the meeting.
Trent Carpenter.
Trent Carpenter with Southern Oregon Sanitation.
Okay, thank you. Eleanor,
Eleanor Panamareff, Talent City Council, just observing. Thanks.
and then Mike.
Mike Baker, ODOT.
Who's the other
Mike Kuntz.
Mike? Oh, he just came in. So,
Mike, are you on the telephone? Mike Coots.
Mike Kuntz, I'm here.
And you're gonna introduce Darren?
All right, Darren.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Darren Neval, I'm the interim Region 3 manager. And Carl stole all my thunder. He did a great job walking through kind of the issues, but just I wanted to hit on a few things before hand it over to Justin and the group to walk through. But just thanks for taking the time. This is important and valuable, and hopefully you guys find it worthwhile your time. We're trying to get better at scoping and estimating for federal aid projects. That is a moving target, as Carl kind of described, but we need to do our best. And we've had a few issues in the past. And so just hopefully we can improve that process and we'll learn as we go. We're continuing to learn as ODOT even. One thing I did want to mention, just in the past, we've had what we call where you can take federal funds and swap it out for state funds with some of the programs. That what we call that is SFLP. That is getting minimized. Our state funding is limited, and so that opportunity is going to get less and less. And so this is even more important, I guess, as we move forward. So just recognize that. And then it is a tough time to estimate and to scope projects just with cost escalation going through the roof right now. But what we're trying to do is do our best there. And then last, I just want to say is the benefit is to all of us if we get this, get these right. It helps us with getting the right amount of funding for the project. It helps with the scope, and then also helps us with timing. When we don't have a good estimate, there's a lot of work behind the scenes before we can even kick off that project to find out if we can come up with the funding or deliver it another way. And so just doing that work up front really will help move these projects along quicker too. So if there's any questions for me, I would take those. Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Justin and the group, unless Carl had something else to add.
You have none.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darren.
Yep. Thanks for your guys' time.
Okay, there are some handouts there on the front. If anybody wants it, there's a CET that has been posted on the website for both MPOs. We're just going to kind of go over that and the expectations that what we see when we fill out our version of the CET. This one is a hybrid version of it. Then there's also a handout specific to the right-of-way presentation that you guys will see. And then there was a quick little rundown on the workshop.
This thing.
Cost estimation tool.
And I should note, and Scott, I know you're on with us too, unless you're building a parking lot or a bus transfer station, transit agencies need not be concerned with this. They know how much a bus costs.
But we are curious, so we can get training and
Well, and you never know what I'm going to submit, so I figured I better be prepared.
watch out.
We've kind of set this up to be, to allow you guys to interrupt and have questions. What Carl is at, at first, we're gonna, kind of go over our estimating tool. And then as we go through, a lot of these questions on the bottom of the, Carl's agenda are after you guys are selected for a project, or if you have a project that's actually in the STIP right now, we can answer some of these questions if it hasn't kicked off.
I'll try to share it. There you go. There we go.
So one of the nice things about this document is Eli used to actually be one of our statewide cost estimators. So this is where I'll actually have him speak a little bit to our CET, and just please note that this is hybrid to ours. We actually update our numbers like monthly, weekly type thing. And we also update our CETs from when it goes from scoping to 150% to the 100%. And so right now, that's just not something possible. I believe that we can do, but these numbers can be adjusted as we move forward with any of the projects that are being reviewed.
So my name's Eli Oberlander. I worked for 2 years up in project control with the statewide cost estimator. So I've quite a bit of background experience in estimating at the state level and then private sector as well. So you guys have all seen this before. This is just kind of a hybrid, like Justin said. And our spec writer just updated all these costs based on regression from the past 3 years of bids at ODOT. So some of these are still low. Again, remember, this is just regression pricing for the past 3 years. So, the bids we've been getting the past month are not going to be reflected in this. So as you guys go through and come up with your line item estimates, I'm not going to teach an estimating class, but just remember, you guys are the ones filling this out. So if you see the price, and you say, wait, that's pretty low, raise that price up a little bit. And provide justification. A lot of times, when I would see estimates come in and save them, I'd see, maybe a bid price 2 or 3 times less than what the average price is, or the other way. And so that's when I'd have a phone call with, the spec writer or the designer, and what their justification was and their reasoning why. So that's for your line items. Your percentage items, mobilization, TP and DT, which is temporary protection and direction of traffic. Those are pretty much set. Erosion control, construction survey, those are all percentage items that are set. There's really no need to move those around. Erosion control typically is about 0.5% on average, so 2% is probably a good number for scoping level, just because we don't have all the detail yet.
So question for those of anybody filling this out that is completely unfamiliar with the market cost for this, we just use your numbers.
Yeah, so this is recent bid prices over the past 3 years at ODOT in Region 3 specific. So use these prices if you don't have, recent bids with history that, you could support changing those. But again, if you think they're low, which they possibly could be, go ahead and go up a little bit with them, or give me a call or somebody at ODOT and we can get you an updated estimate.
When we copied these over, this was 2 months ago. So costs have, for some line items, have gone up 20 to 40%.
And just out of curiosity, and that's something we can put on both websites, the 4 of you guys from ODOT, will you give us your contact information so that we can post it on our website? Justin, too late, I got yours.
Yeah, anytime, any one of the TPMs can answer any of the calls.
So we'll make that available on both websites. So if anybody has questions, you'll have the contact information. Thank you.
And you'll notice this is a pretty finite list. I mean, there's obviously well more bid items than what we've got listed here. So these are kind of the big ticket items that show up on a lot of projects. So that's why they're in here. You'll have projects that don't have quite a bit of them, obviously. You'll have some that maybe aren't on here. So that's where you'll take a look and say, maybe if it's, a $500 item, maybe that's not, something you should sweat over. But if it's like a $20,000 item, maybe you'll add the row in there, or make sure it's included in contingency or something like that. Those are the discussions that, the estimators have with designers and spec writers. Just making sure it's covered somewhere in the estimate. That's kind of the idea. Then you get to page
So,
5.
sorry, on
Yeah,
these
go ahead.
percentages that you have at the top, what is that applied to?
So that's of the biddable total. So those percentages are of the biddable amount of work. So let's say you add up all the items that are not the percentages and it's $100,000. The 10% would be 10,000 for mobilization, 10,000 TP and DT.
So on
it's
top
the
of your
biddable work.
estimate, you add this percentage of.
It calculates it for you.
Like at the end when you're done with.
Yeah,
all
so
the
as
other
you're typing it
items?
in, it'll just start calculating 10% of the
Yeah.
estimate in that row for you.
So as you identify the item, you go out, if X amount of road, X amount of curb, you put those feet in, it'll hit your line item there and it'll automatically put in at the 10%, 15%, whichever it is.
I think we have a hand raised as well.
Rob,
Oh,
go ahead.
he's muted.
Hey, so have you guys noticed any significant differences of economies for, a couple $100,000 projects versus multi-million? I mean, obviously like a signal installation is not going to change much, but any efficiencies on any of those items that you're seeing?
Yeah, that's especially with it costs what it costs to run through OPO. So we have them typically.
OPO is.
The Office of Project.
It's a procurement office.
Procurement office.
Oh,
It's not
okay.
OPO anymore, it's PCO.
Alright.
Old nomenclature, sorry. So it costs to do all the federal documentation with environmental, all the right-of-way certs, more or less everything you have to have in line to certify that you have a clean federal aid project. We're estimating about $300,000 as a minimum to go through. So if you have $1 million project, obviously that's more than the 15% to grant that's being calculated for it. So if you had a $500,000 project, you should just automatically add another $300,000 for it, the cost for a consultant and for ODOT to get the project through to bid. That's that is our minimum.
Okay, thank you.
To remind everybody, at least in the RV MPO, the recommendation from the TAC and the agreement of the policy committee is that for federal funds, it should be a $1 million minimum. That is not a hard floor, because if you have a project that you believe you can put in for less than that and you can justify it, bring it to the TAC. A good example are those flashing pedestrian beacons. If you already own the right of way, that's less than $1 million, but you got to justify it.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Davis Bacon, he's representing Davis Bacon wages?
Yeah, so the way our contracting works is it's the hire of Foley or Davis Bacon. A lot of times it's Davis Bacon, but yeah, that's what these bid prices are reflective of that. Yeah, we very rarely have state-only projects. And even when we do the bid, it's really hard to differentiate on the line item, okay, that's Foley versus, combo. So it's really hard to tell, but almost all of our projects are the combo, Davis Bacon and Foley.
In general, I would suggest that everyone assume that it's going to be fully federally funded, not state funded. Assume all the federal requirements are going to apply. Assume that ODOT was going to hire a consultant and there's additional fees and costs associated with that, and that it's going to go through the project controls office for ODOT to bid the project.
Was that Justin Burnt?
As Justin Burns.
Yes.
Thank you, Justin.
Okay, so
So
that,
those additional costs, they do assume.
If you could
consultant-
approach the microphone.
Oh, yeah, those additional costs, they assume consultant delivers rather than.
Correct.
Okay.
Did everyone hear that?
No.
Could you repeat it near the microphone?
Yeah, I guess my question was, there's a difference in cost for delivering these projects, whether it's delivered by ODOT or consultant. So that was my question. And this assumes consultant delivered projects versus. I'll just clarify.
This being this document.
Your
This
hybrid
document and then the cost associated with.
Yeah,
it.
I removed the ODOT portion for ODOT delivery out of it. So typically ODOT delivery is maybe 10% less than a consultant.
What percentage of your projects are done by consultants versus ODOT
That's different region to region.
in this region?
25. Well, are you including?
50% or more?
No,
no, way less. I think the last was like 20-ish%.
Now, that doesn't include local agency projects. So that's typically just ODOT outsourced for doing ODOT projects. So you would add another percentage componentry to it for ODOT delivered by, for local agency.
For,
So-
not by local.
Yeah, for local agency.
Because currently we do not have any fully certified local agencies.
Thank you, Carl. So that's, any other questions on the bid items themselves, not the percentage that we'll get into right here?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So I didn't see, I was going through this on a couple of our projects we're looking at. I didn't see anything for like stormwater quality detention in here. Is that?
Yeah, so that's something that you'll be adding to project specific. So not all, not all projects have that. So that'll be something that you'll want to make sure you have in a row somewhere and include that in the biddable section. So then it'll be rolled up into the mobilization, TP and DP and all that.
Okay.
If you have a good estimate for it, yeah. definitely
So
put it in there.
Carl's an engineer. I'm assuming you're an engineer?
No, I'm not an engineer.
Okay, but you've worked with this. For those local communities that do not have engineers on retainer, how would they know whether stormwater should be included in the project?
Anytime that you guys add curb and gutter, you're gonna have stormwater on it, because you're gonna have to treat it, because that's gonna be part of your environmental requirements, that anytime you go out and put hard surface out, you will now need to be treating the facility.
Did everybody hear that?
Well, and I'd like to make a correction to that, because under the Rogue Valley stormwater manual, whatever that we follow, locally, if we, I think, do 10,000 square feet or more of reconstruction, we have to do water quality. So I would recommend that this document be modified and add either a percentage based or a flat fee, so it makes people think about the fact that it should be in there. Because unless you're putting in a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, you're probably going to have water quality and detention requirements, one, the other, or both. So I would recommend that it's added to this. So as people are continuing to refine this up until their deadline, they can have that in there.
We actually have, which Eli will get into these, the little check sheets, we have that, we can actually add that to this whole sheet. We just left it out.
Yeah, I'm just saying that it should just be added.
That can
so
be
that-
easily added. We can add another sheet or up.
Could you
an
give me a
updated
reference, Alex, that we can give them and we can put it on the sheet so that if you're doing something in the Rogue Valley, look at this, you need to consider this.
And typically it comes up through your environmental, that if you're doing any type of hardscape that's going to change your runoff potential, you're going to end up most likely. So I assume even in Josephine County, they're going to have the same constraints. So like I said, I would add it, but I will definitely provide something.
Well, again, for those cities that don't have engineers on retainer or don't have the staff that do this on a regular basis, we need to make this as simple as possible and make sure that as they're going down the list of what to be included, we have these notes saying, if you're going to do this, you need to consider this.
And at any time, any of the local agencies can reach out to one of the TPMs, and then specific for any of the environmental stuff, that's when we'd be, and one of the reasons why Doug is here, is we would bring Doug and we could actually go meet on site. So that's something we talked about too.
Cool.
Yeah, that's something I typically try to pick up on during scoping. And when we go out and take a look at these projects, where you add an impervious, or you changing the drainage runoff, all those sort of things, and having this this checklist, a scoping estimate in here, I can check that box saying, hey, you're going to need some sort of stormwater treatment, whether it's, however you decide to do it. I mean, that's up to you guys, but anyway, at least you'll know that, hey, we better look at this, and it could be a significant cost.
That'll be helpful. My one question is, how much time do you have?
Well, we just went
Very-
through
very
our four,
little.
yeah,
Yeah.
we just went through our 4-year cycle. So it's like a 6-month process for us to do scoping. Minimum with all of our resources. And we're still actually not done. We have most of our 150 in, and we're still doing business cases. We're still filling out and refining some of the documents.
Well, I mean, what I'm getting at is if the locals call up and say, hey, I don't know if I need to include this or not, can you come out and take a look?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I mean, part of the federal funding and the federal process is the completion of NEPA. And so that's something that I do. And so with local agency projects, I actually, you know, do a prospectus. And so that's kind of more of a more in-depth scoping as I work through that. And that's where I identify those needs. And hopefully, you know, as you get that prospectus, as you see that, you'll recognize it.
Okay, so point of clarification here. The idea, I thought, of what we're doing today is to try to help us better be prepared to have our projects properly costed out, not necessarily scope, but costed out so that when we get to, by the time you get involved, Doug, we've already made a selection. So this is pre-selection. How are we making sure that there's
That's my question.
Yeah,
If any, before the deadline for them to submit, I believe is May 27th.
So Doug can be brought into the project while you guys are creating or looking at trying to put your estimates together.
All right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 jurisdictions that do not have on staff engineers that probably be applying for money. So I just want to make sure if they have questions, the whole point behind this is to make sure their questions get answered.
well, and hopefully to make sure that we have a realistic project cost when we're trying to select it, because oftentimes in the past, people, simple thing like a right-of-way file, people don't really consider the fact that they need a temporary construction easement to actually be able to build within their right-of-way often. And on this form, it says $15,000, right? So if you haven't considered that, and you have 10 of these, you have $150,000 planned in a project that you came in here and said was a $250,000 project. It's like, no, you don't have a $250,000 project. You have a $750,000 project, and you have to come up with match on 750, not 250, and all of a sudden it may kill a small jurisdiction's ability to even apply.
For the money, right?
You know, 75,000 versus 25,000 might be the difference between.
But the point here is I'd rather them learn that before applying.
Well, that's exactly, because when we're in the room trying to make a decision and we're sending it off to the policy committee,
Right.
it becomes very difficult. So that's why I think the goal of trying to make sure that we have a solid handle on this, what it takes to build a federal project, so that we can make a reasonable estimate based on a very high level. You know, we're not going into preliminary engineering. We're at very high level to determine what these projects are going to look like. So
Yeah, so the difficulty in the water quality, you know, features basically is those are lump sum items.
Yeah.
So pulling bid data on that's really not going to be beneficial, but, you know, I'll get to a little bit later in here where that's where reaching out and, you know, Doug or myself, I can help you guys out if you guys, you know, have an idea of what you guys need. And obviously it's going to come from the environmental section, what you guys need out there. The estimating part is easy, that's for me, but coming up with what you need, that's where it's going to have more one-on-one dialogue with somebody, you know, an engineer or Doug or.
well, maybe that's where, as a recommendation for this process, is in the spreadsheet, you don't put a dollar amount in, you say either you have the knowledge to put a number in here or contact Doug's home number, right? Call Doug.
Yeah, no, that's good. Good input.
No, you know, I mean, RBSS has a pretty, you know, prescriptive, you know, flow chart on when treatment is needed and what triggers that. And so ODOT does as well. And so that information is available as far as, you know, what triggers the need to treat and or detain stormwater runoff. So we can get you some of that information if needed to maybe put in your packet or whatever.
One of the pieces of the CET is that it can be adjusted. So we can add the additional pages that ODOT has in our scoping package. So we can add these to your guys' scoping document at any time. So it's just more sheet, you know, more descriptive documentation that Eli can talk about as you're going through your project. You can go to each one of the little boxes on the spreadsheet and fill those out, just so you get a good comprehensive idea how much the project is going to be before you guys start filling out your application. Go on.
Yeah, so then you get to the, you can go back to the first page, that cost estimate page. Scroll up a little bit to start with the project phases and summary of costs, a little bit higher. Yeah, so there you go. So you'll see the right of way section starts out first. I'm not going to get too much into that. I'll leave that for the right of way. And then utility as well. Those are things you guys are going to have to put in project specific. And then just on down the line, preliminary engineering, ODOT oversight, that might need to be adjusted if it's, like Justin said, it might be $300,000 is what we need between that and our down there at 134 where we have our outsourced project design. So a lot of this is going to be dialogue. The environmental section for sure, that'll be a dialogue where you'll have to get with Doug and kind of get an idea of what that's going to be for each project. And then the construction section, those are all percentages of the construction bid item. The very bottom's your construction contingency that obviously goes to 3.5% at bid, but early on, you don't have the detail in the estimate. So historically, it's 30 to 35% is what nationwide construction engineering percentage is at. And then ODOT oversight. Back one more. So the ODOT oversight typically is like 7 to 15% if we don't outsource. So these are all going to be outsourced. So those are typically going to be, 20 to 25% is what you'd be putting in that all the way down at the bottom. Basically the CACEI services for the contract. Any questions on this? I don't know, Justin, or you want me to go through all the tabs or just kind of give them an idea of what they're for?
I don't know if we need to get into that details. The specific two areas that we see a lot of fault with estimating local agency projects are the environmental section with how much it costs to get all of the NEPA documentation in place and any mitigation, and then right away. And so that's why we specifically brought in those two tech units to do a presentation themselves. So I don't know if you guys want to go over any of the sheets on the bottom. They're, you can use them however you guys see fit, and we can add additional sheets. So we, like I said, we do have stormwater, so we can add that sheet and it can be updated with additional sheets. We just try to keep this as simple as possible because it was, it went from 1 page to 7 or 8 pages pretty quickly.
On those additional sheets, when I downloaded the live document, I couldn't my computer kept, Excel kept crashing every time I tried to do a save as.
Really?
So ultimately I had to, for the estimate sheet, I copied it into a different workbook to use it.
So ODOT still uses like a 5-year-old Microsoft. So make sure that you might want to update the file. That's just how ODOT is. We're typically 5 years behind the modern Microsoft programs. So that could be when we're still using macros embedded into our worksheets. So when you guys get that up, I would upgrade it to the newest save file.
Are you able to, you're not able to save it, is what you're saying?
Yeah,
It's
not
encrypted or
even
something.
like, it just crashed Excel every time I tried to do a save as. I don't know if anyone else has tried yet, but
We'll look into it.
yeah,
Which form is it?
this Excel document.
Yeah, so if it
The
came.
one we have on our website?
Yeah, so if it came from ODOT, it's in old, because we're 4 or 5 years behind on all of our Microsoft process projects.
So you're gonna send us a new one we can post?
Yeah, we'll look into it.
Figure it, yeah.
Okay.
If you
That's easy
want to,
stuff.
if you want to send it to me, I might be able to update it before I upload it to the website.
We should already have it.
I guess, yeah, one of the biggest things is just documentation. So a lot of those tabs, there's a lot of detail in there that are going to trigger, ideas, or maybe that should be in the estimate type of thought. So the documentation process is big, especially, in project development. You get to an estimate, it's like, wow, where did we get this cost from? Why is it so different from our last one? We can go back to our assumptions and say, oh, we didn't have that in our assumptions, document it and move forward. So those are those are the big, kind of lessons learned on what we want to be doing with estimating, using recent bid prices. And, we're not creating a tool that's going to give you an estimate. There's got to be someone behind the machine that's looking at that and saying, okay, well, price did go higher. I'm going to increase the numbers here or inflate. And then obviously it's missing something or it doesn't need that. That's where the person that's putting the estimate together, that's where they're really going to shine. So, any questions?
So specifically, what Doug was already talking about, some of the stuff with the water quality, I was gonna have him run through the environmental sheet itself. So that if you guys have any questions about the possible identification of wetlands, any of those types of things, Doug is who we go to. There's also another rec, but for local agency projects, we specifically have Doug involved in all of our projects.
Yeah, and the reality is I don't really have a lot to talk about on this other than what's up there. I didn't know if you guys had had a chance to look at it, had any, questions on this. If when you guys are taking a look at this, have you guys been filling something like this out previously, or is this all kind of foreign and new and something you guys are
It
gonna
wasn't this in depth, but we did have a cost estimation.
Yeah.
do?
Worksheet.
More or less the front page.
Okay, so I didn't have any of the environmental stuff in there. So this, I recently scoped a couple projects, I think for a city in Medford, using basically this tool and went through and with all the check boxes and everything that they had in it.
Oh, here we go.
It didn't spit out an estimate for me, so I'm not sure how much all that costs, but it's something during scoping that now that you guys are going to have this, that I can definitely help you fill out.
So if I'm filling this out and I'm completely ignorant of where the 100-year floodplain is within the FEMA regulated floodway is, are there maps
Yes,
available on the website, on your website? So if we can
there's maps available, FEMA website. All this information, well, a lot of this information is available. What I'll typically do is go through, do a quick ORBIC search of the ORBIC is for endangered species. So, but we have a program, we go in, we can download GIS layers to basically populate any of those sort of things that you're looking for. So I'll go through, I'll turn on all those layers and check yes or no whether or not they're in your project. Those layers are all readily available. I don't know if you have the ability to download, so the ODOT toolbar, or are they privy to that? Are you guys privy to that? We have a toolbar that we use specifically for ODOT. It's a GIS toolbar that maybe you can get that has all these layers on it.
I don't
And
on the TransGIS.
yeah, and I don't know if
So
you guys
that's
are,
internal.
I don't know if it's internal or
I
not.
do know you
It
guys.
might be external facing now.
Yeah, you
We're
guys
working
do
on
have
it.
an environmental website that we had to develop our own before you told us you had your own.
Yeah,
Yeah,
All
all of those links, I believe, are on there, and I believe TransGIS is now outward facing. So you can use a lot of the tools that are in that on the TransGIS. And we can send that link.
Yeah, if you would, thank you.
yeah, the majority of these are on there. And, as far as, I don't know if you want me to get in depth as far as, NEPA, I don't know how much you guys know about NEPA and what all it entails. Just to give you kind of a refresher or kind of an overview, what's going to happen is I'll come in, do a scoping estimate or do a scoping document similar to this, and then I write a prospectus. And that prospectus basically is it decides the kind of the level of NEPA moving forward based on the impacts. And then once I do that, I then determine whether or not it's going to be a programmatic approach to NEPA and NEPA completion. And if it if it is indeed, most of them are programmatic and basically what that, it's a programmatic categorical exclusion, which is a PCE. Then I'll complete that documentation. And then once I have all these permits and clearances that I need as required by NEPA, then I'll do my CE closeout. So I basically end up having to complete 3 documents for NEPA. And then within those documents, I have all these permits and clearances that I use as attachments for my final NEPA document. And so it's kind of complex when you have federal dollars and have to walk through that process.
One thing, while that sheet is on the screen right now, all of you can see under air quality, there are 3 pollutants, CO, ozone, and PM10. We are yes for CO and PM10. We are always yes for CO and PM10. And that's going to change in the future, not for the better. But anyway, Middle Rogue is in non-attainment for CO and PM10,
But only in the downtown area.
CO.
Yeah.
Well, CO in downtown.
Yeah, Medford.
Yeah.
Medford.
In,
Yeah.
it's only for downtown.
So yeah, Medford and Grants Pass are the only 2 there for both, sorry. PM10 everywhere else.
Yeah, I brought a quick little presentation, if you don't mind, just to kind of walk through the NEPA process. If you guys are interested at all, kind of show you that. And then I have a couple example projects that I just did, that I just scoped. Might help you out a little bit to kind of understand what environmental stuff we're talking about here.
So does this scoping estimate get attached to the application?
Yes, and it's also on the website.
And all the tabs need to be filled out or just the estimate part itself?
That's a good question.
I mean, the tabs are specifically for you guys to build your estimate, so I don't think you need to fill them all out. You could just put NA on them. With our overall document, they're autofill, so we have them connected back into our larger sheet. And so it's a tool that we can adjust and you guys can adjust. We just want to give you something that was a little bit more robust than what you were using before.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dan, you just need to reshare.
Okay.
Stop sharing.
Yeah, see the green share? You can do a new share.
All right. All right, so basically anytime anytime you receive federal funding or anytime you have a federal nexus, you have to complete NEPA. And so basically these are all projects that are funded by, assisted by, regulated by, conducted by, approved by, permitted by a federal agency. And so you can see, even when you have a project that maybe hasn't received federal FHWA dollars, but you have a core permit or something like that, that's going to trigger the need to do NEPA. And so the core is actually going to probably do the NEPA for you, but you'll need to provide the information needed to complete that documentation. So, anyway, just a little quick overview on NEPA stuff here.
So to clarify that,
Yes.
if we're building a project and we're not using federal funds, but somehow the Corps is involved, now it's a federalized project?
No, you still have to do NEPA documentation, which means the local agency would be working directly with the Corps to get their permits.
Yeah, it's part of the permitting process. NEPA is a federal law, and so it's triggered by that. And so it's the Corps' obligation to do it at that point. So anyway, some of the objectives really are to disclose, analyze, and consider environmental information as a criteria when making decisions about federal actions. One of the other important things that's often neglected in NEPA is informing the public of potential impacts and alternatives and involve the public in decision making. You guys do a good job of that, so probably not a big deal for you, but for us, a lot of times we forget to do some of that, and it's something in my NEPA documentation that I really need to document. So as I'm working through with you guys on these federal projects, if you can keep me apprised of any sort of public meetings or public information that's been distributed, it goes into my NEPA closeout document for the feds. Important stuff. It's procedural law. I kind of spoke to this a little bit. It basically says you have to follow this procedure. And within that procedure, you have to comply with all these other rules and regulations, the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act. For us, it's mostly the National Historic Preservation Act and the Endangered Species Act. But there's other things like hazmat and stuff in there included as well. So a lot of other rules and regulations that need to be complied with to be able to complete NEPA. And I just went over this with you guys, about what I have to do as far as NEPA is required. I have to fill out the prospectus and then the PCE determination form and PCE approval document. And the caveat here is if it doesn't meet the PCE, the programmatic agreement that we have with Federal Highway, then it has to go through a CE documentation, which makes it a little bit more time sensitive. And the reason I say that is because Federal Highway can't release right-of-way funding until the CE is complete. And so typically, with a ODOT project, we don't really start purchasing right-of-way until DAP. And so what it would mean is I would have to have all my CE closeout, all my CE documentation and NEPA complete by DAP, which is kind of a interim level of plans that makes it a little bit more difficult to complete all that documentation. So it's important to try to fit it into the PCE. So here's a recent one I just did. This would kind of give you an example of unforeseen sort of stuff. This is a bridge rehab project up in Roseburg, local agency project. Initially just taking a look at it, it's like pretty simple. They're going to go out, they're going to construct some ADA ramps, clean up the trusses. They actually have to do some scour repair for some, which will mean a little bit of in-water work. They're going to replace the sidewalk on the deck. Just your typical, it's an old bridge. It needs some rehab, so they're going to fix it up. But after I started looking at it and diving in a little bit, I realized, obviously we're going to need staging and access, and that's important for you guys to think of too as you're doing these projects. Where you're going to stage, how you're going to access it. That all fits within that area of potential impact that you might have. And so with that, knowing that they have to go down and do some abutment protection, I had to take into account that's where they're going to stage and access. And so as I dove in a little further, you can see that there's parks in each quadrant. There's also a school there. And so I thought, that could be a major cost as well. And so anyway, what that did, even as I looked even further and started digging into it, I realized it's a historic bridge, which is considered historically significant. So, with that triggers potential for an adverse effect, which would mean a 4F process, which is a lengthy process that requires analysis of alternatives and can be very expensive and time consuming. It's also within Coast Guard jurisdiction, which can add a whole nother layer of bureaucracy to your project. Fortunately, we're not replacing the bridge, so we basically just have to get their concurrence that they're okay with what we're doing to it. And I found out there's known artifacts there as well. And so it's likely going to require some additional probing. And that's another costly item as well. And so if they do discover something during their probing, they may have to use some sort of avoidance or recovery as well. And also, they're proposing a potential road closure, which is common. Fortunately for this one, there's a detour, easy detour, shouldn't be a significant impact to traffic, but there is a VA hospital on one side and a school on the other. So coordination with those entities is going to be really important. As I showed before, there's parks, bike paths, all this stuff is potential for analysis as well. Lengthy process again. And they also received land and water conservation funds, which could trigger 6F use, which is a big issue. So anyway, these are all big ticket items. And with this was just basically the simple stuff that I thought would be the hard stuff for this was actually, ESA and core permit, ESL permit, and hazmat testing. But anyway, as you can see with this seemingly simple project, a lot of things perked up and it became really expensive really fast. So as you're looking at funding and things like that, it's important to note all that stuff. Yes.
Just a question about Coast Guard jurisdiction that surprised me. Is there any Coast Guard jurisdiction on the Rogue River?
Grants Pass.
Really? Okay.
Second bridge.
Yeah, and so
Does that apply to all of the Rogue River? That you have to check things with the Coast Guard? I'm just.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of draw the line at certain locations, and on the south umpire where that one is.
Well, it has to be navigable waters. for the Coast
Exactly.
Guard.
And so
Oh, that's kind of up in the air on the road.
yeah, I mean, yeah, we're all the way up in Roseburg, and so it's questionable whether it's navigable, but they take jurisdiction, so you really have to comply. Kind of difficult. And then, of course, here's Wade's project, Allen Creek. Yeah. Allen Creek improvements there. So anyway, just digging into this one, I started going through the prospectus and some of the potential things that are going to occur here. You guys were able to purchase that piece of property there. Having difficulties, finding places to treat stormwater. So having this piece of property in the middle here should really help with that. Which is kind of nice. That'll make it so that offsite treatment probably isn't needed, which will be a big bonus. Some of the key issues for this one here that I was discussing with Federal Highway, and also, as far as NEPA is concerned, when I talked about public coordination and things like that, that's a big deal out of this one. There's some landowners that aren't real pleased with it. And so, working with those and coordinating with those folks is going to be a bit of a bear. Right-of-way acquisition. Anytime you have potential for displacements, that kicks you into another category of NEPA. So that'll kick us into having a CE rather than a PCE. And so knowing that up front is really important. And there's also socioeconomic issues that we're going to have to deal with out there as well. So it's not just, wetlands and things like that. It's people issues as well. And so also air quality that are going to have to do potentially do a qualitative analysis if they install a signal at New Hope. And noise. I think
Wait,
that.
I'm sorry, back up. If they install a signal, they're going to have to do an air quality conformity analysis?
Yes, it's just that the signal at New Hope may trigger that according to our noise specialist in Salem.
Noise specialist.
I mean, our air quality specialist, I apologize. Yeah, our air quality analysis.
Is this an interconnected signal?
I think it'd be standalone, but I believe the traffic data shows we don't need one there right now. So it's kind of a moot point.
Yeah, because there's got to be some kind of threshold to kick that off. What's the ADT done?
Well, the original ADTs of this project went in, it was like 6,000.
2008.
Yeah, so it's we're figuring out that it's much lower than what was put into this prospectus, which was shared with the regulators.
So if it's lower, it should.
It's low, yeah, so it lowers, it typically allows us not to actually have to do some of these studies.
Yeah, and that's the same with the noise. You know, that was a trigger when they saw the jump in the ADT on the noise folks were really concerned.
It went from 25 to 6,000.
Yeah. Yeah, and so anyway, that was like, wow, we're gonna have to do a noise analysis, noise study out there. And so anyway, that's another big ticket item. And then also we thought there might be parks out there because parks had purchased some money, or purchased some property out there. And talking with FHWA, if those properties haven't been developed or used as a park, then 4F is no longer triggered. And so that's a really good thing. That helps us a lot.
Great.
So we're happy about that. So that one's going away too. So you're dodging some bullets.
Yeah, we are.
This is good. And so anyway, yeah, we'll have to do a farmland conversion impact rating. That's kind of a unique little dude. And that's just based pretty much on soils that are out there existing that classified as prime, unique, statewide, or local important farmland. But you know, those are kind of the interesting ones, and these are all just the other permits and clearances that'll be required out there. You can see it's a long laundry list. Each will take time, effort, and money, and so you know, with a project like that, you can anticipate the majority of these items to occur.
That's for every project. So when we say we have to do that $300,000 mark to what it costs, this is typically for every project that has federal funding in it. We still have these permits. They may be a permit that it's no effect, but we still have to have one of these.
DOE is that Department of Energy?
No, that's a determination of effect. And so,
Oh,
yeah,
okay. What's
yeah.
FOE? Finding of effect?
Finding of effect. Yeah. And so that's, you know, especially with a road widening project, when you're going through and you know, kicking out the Phyllis slope, you're gonna hit some wetlands. You're gonna need some RP discovery and things like that. So anyway, this is pretty typical of a road widening project. And like I said, it's classified currently as a CE, which means we need to get our documentation done, NEPA documentation done early by DAP. And so we'll need to do a lot of these studies and you know, clear all these regulatory hurdles fairly early in the process in order to receive funding from federal highway for right-of-way acquisition. That's it. So anyway, I just kind of want to go over that for you and kind of give you an idea, you know, as we're going through these lists, you know, some of the items that could, you know, jump up and bite you if you don't know that they're there or that you need them. Expensive.
Thank you.
You bet.
You guys have any questions for Doug? So I guess the next big piece that has been one of the estimating issues that we've seen is right of way. And so we have two of our right of way agents here that'll be giving a presentation, and you want to come up and sit or tell.
I'm Shayla Sternberg. I am in the region headquarters office up in Roseburg. Jane Randleman is my counterpart down here in White City. She's out of the White City office, and she takes care of most of the project management down here. Occasionally she can't handle it all, so we may take something up in the Roseburg office, but that's about all that we really take care of. So right-of-way scoping is a unique process. The dollar amounts are, you're trying to put a price on something that we don't know. There's no solid answers, and if it can change, it will. And what may appear as a simple project will change just like that. It's, we're kind of magicians when we are making our scoping estimates. For government agencies, when using federal funds, government agencies are required by the Constitution to pay just compensation to landowners. And just compensation is not only just to the property owner, but it's also just to the government and its citizens. We have to be very, we can't just give the farm away, I guess is what it is. People can, everybody thinks their property is worth, the world, and we have to bring them back to reality, that we're offering them fair market value, and try to get them to sign documents without any big problems.
Could I just add one clarification to that? If you're using federal funds, even if they offer to donate, you still have to offer fair market value.
So the way that works is if it's a donation, and I was going to cover it a little bit later, but that's fine. So if it's a donation, you have to give them the opportunity to receive an appraisal with just compensation on that appraisal. Doesn't mean we have to pay it to them, but they have the right to an appraisal if they so choose. So you have to remember that when you have a donation. You also can only ask for the donation. You cannot coerce them. You can't promise them anything.
Unless you're in Texas.
So you have to be careful. You offer, you ask them if they'd like to donate. They have to say whether they would, ODOT actually has a form that they sign that says, we waive the appraisal. But if they want an appraisal, we have to give them an appraisal. So that can affect your costs if you have to go out and get an appraisal on that. And of course, you still have to follow the Uniform Act on anything that has federal funds on it, and the ODOT right-of-way manual, which in some cases is stronger than the Uniform Act. So both of those have to be followed. Both of them can be found online. You find the right-of-way manual on the ODOT right-of-way site.
Alex, you have a question?
I have a question about something that's come up here in the past, and I know it affected Medford. If you've already purchased right away in the past for your project and it didn't follow the Uniform Relocation Act, it can be very challenging. So I just want to make sure if you're covering that or reminding people that this could really bite you if it's something that.
Yeah, you have the chance of losing federal funds, and not just for the right-of-way. They will pull the federal funds from the project. So that's why it's really important that we follow the Uniform Act.
Well, but that's, so if you've already purchased years ago or decades ago, in Medford's case, when we were doing Springbrook and we got federal funds, we had to go find all of our documentation to show that we followed the Uniform Relocation Act.
Yeah, that you follow. Yeah, we always have to follow it, even in the past. So there's 3 ways that we can acquire property. So we buy it in fee title. So that is where we buy the property, we buy the land, we own it. So that would become right of way for us. You can buy it in a permanent easement, and that's the right to use the property of another for a specific reason. So if you go out and you buy a slope easement, you cannot then put sidewalk in that easement. You need to then go out and buy another sidewalk easement. So you have to be very specific about your easement type when you're buying it in permanent easement. A temporary, and then we also buy in temporary easements, and these most of the time are temporary easements for work areas. And a temporary easement is giving us the right to use another's property for a specific amount of time. And you have to remember that also that the temporary easement, if that's all you've got is a temporary easement document, that typically those are not recorded, and that temporary easement starts the day they sign the document. So if you've got a 1-year temporary easement and a 2-year project, you got a problem. So keep that in mind when you're buying those temporary easements, that the time starts either at recording or when they sign the document if it's not going to be recorded. So right-of-way timelines, this is one that's really easy to get shortened unintentionally by other disciplines, because right-of-way is at the very end of the project, of the preliminary project, before you start construction. Everybody else, if they get pushed, I need 2 more weeks, and the next one needs 2 more weeks, and then the next one, now you're 6 weeks into our timeline. And we can't move our timeline out any, because we're set on the bid date. If we can't make possession of all the properties, then your bid date gets pushed out, and that can affect your project. Our timelines don't start until after we've got legal description and the project's been authorized. So we cannot start anything in right-of-way until we have authorization on the project and legal descriptions. An uncomplicated file takes approximately 7 to 9 months. Complicated files can be 11 to 18, sometimes more. If your project has more than one file, you have to take that into consideration also, because the more files you have, the longer you're going to have. Because everything just takes time to get things done. So some of the things that can turn a project from simple to complicated that need to be thought about when you're doing your scoping is there going to be any relocation of personal property. Relocation has its own set of timelines. So that has to be taken into consideration. If we're going to be acquiring from a railroad, these are expensive and time consuming, because we're on the railroad's time, not ours. We don't have much control over that, and we just have to work with the railroad. If there's multiple owners, you may have to send an offer to 6 different people, and they can be all over the world. That can be time consuming to get everybody in agreement and all on the same page. Large corporations, the problem with large corporations is finding who can actually sign the document. It's a challenge, believe me. If there was a recent death of an owner, this can cause problems with the legal work. Has probate has probate gone through? Things like that can cause it. Unknown title and complex title issues. So I had a project that had just 3 files, supposed to be easy. It was actually an emergency project, so we'd already done the construction, thank goodness, because one of my files had the owner of record was deceased. There were multiple owners listed, but none of them were the owner of record because title was never transferred correctly. So I have a deceased owner and other people who are claiming the property. So needless to say, I had to go out because I didn't have anybody I could send an offer to make a legal offer. I had to post the offer on the property for 40 days. Then we had to send it to condemnation and condemn on it, so the DOJ can gavel down to declare an owner so that we can do it. It took 2 years. So had a project been waiting for that, we'd have been in trouble, because there wasn't even anybody that we could get permission from to continue the project. So that's just one of the types of things that you can come across when you're looking at complex title issues. If it's historic properties, that brings a whole other thing. Owners are out of country. You have to figure out how to get an offer to them. How do they get it notarized? How do we get it back? We've dealt with a few of those, and they always are very time consuming because mail just doesn't go real fast. Bankruptcies also will cause title issues. If it's a demolition or hazmat, those have to happen after we've acquired right-of-way. So if our right-of-way has been pushed, if we're up to the timeline, we're not giving any time for demolition and hazmat cleanups before the project starts construction. So that can be an issue. If it's tribal lands and it's in the trust, it has to go through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And if there's language and communication barriers, those can be tricky. We may have to bring in translators who can help us communicate to what we're doing, because in order to acquire right-of-way, they have to be able to understand understand in their terms what we're doing. We can't just go up and ask them to sign something. They have to understand what we're doing. So when we're scoping, we look at some different things. After you've been given an area of potential impact and you have an idea of what we're going to buy. So say we're going to go through and do a sidewalk project. So right off the bat, we're going to start scoping that as saying we need 5 feet behind the sidewalk. If there's no sidewalk there, then we need to kind of work with the designers a little bit to give us an idea of how far back from the sidewalk we're going to need property. So they may tell us, or not from the sidewalk, from the property line. So they may tell us we need 10 feet from the property line. So they'll give us something to go on so that we can start that scoping. So then after we figured that out, then I go on Jackson County Online usually and do ownership searches so I can find out who the owners are, what are the complexities of that, are they banks, is it a school, tribal lands, so that will help me get an idea of how much time I'm going to need for this project. I always try to go out and view the project in person so that I can be feet on the ground and see what we could be impacting. Because the impacts are the things that get missed very easily. And we really need to know what is out there. If you can't go out, if you're familiar with the area, you can't get out there to walk the project, then I would encourage you to at least use Google Maps so that you can get an idea of what's out there. At least you're going to be able to know if there's signs, buildings, whatever that could be in the right of way. And that's really important. Because some of the things that you need to be looking for when you go out there are private signs and billboards. The billboard rules have just changed. The laws have changed around billboards. If a billboard sits on a tax lot that you have a take on, and it doesn't matter what kind of take, you have a take on that, the billboard company can actually come back and ask for damages. So avoid billboards at all costs. That's about the best I can tell you. Billboards can cost up to $1 million to move if we're impacting them that bad. So you have to keep that in mind.
What if the billboard violates the sign regulations that ODOT controls?
Then it should never been put there.
I know, but if you're taking it, then you don't have to pay the $1 million, right?
Yeah, I don't have a clue how that would work. That'd have to be sent up to our sign people.
Any of the billboards that have the permit number underneath it, they're completely protected comparatively to like the McDonald's type signs that also follow under this.
Yeah.
Same thing. So the permit signs, there's no more of those permits. So that's one of the reasons why it costs so much for those.
So if you need to go out and look and see if we're impacting any real property, personal property. Septic tanks and wells, especially if you're in a rural area, can be a big deal. We've got a project right now that's out. It's in Grants Pass. It's seismic bridges. And at Foots Creek Bridge, the original area we tried to buy was the woman's drain field. So we have spent the last year trying to get that moved so that we don't impact her drain field, because there is no other place on her property to put a drain field. So we can't even relocate it. So that's been very interesting. Fencing, irrigation, landscaping, parking, trees and crops can all cause additional costs that you need to be aware of, and try not to miss them. You're going to miss something. You just can't cover it all. As much as I would like to say we can, we will miss things. So when in eminent domain appraising, the land value of the larger parcel is valued to its highest and best use as if vacant and ready for development. So what that means is we go out and we appraise the property as if it was vacant. I don't care that there's a McDonald's there. The price that I'm going to get for fair market value for the land is what I'm impacting. So unless I'm impacting that building, the value I'm getting is just the land value of the property, because all I'm buying is just the land. That's hard for people to understand, but that's eminent domain law.
You have to get 3 estimates or just 1?
3 for
For the fair market value. You just have one?
We
firm?
have one appraisal.
That's it.
One appraisal gives us that.
Independent appraisal.
Yep. Yeah. We use the sales comparison approach in our appraisals most of the time. And that just compares sale to the property. We analyze those current sales. And when you're trying to come up with a value for the property, the easiest way to do it is pull sales, find out what is sold in the area, what the land value of those sales were. So then you can base a value on what you're buying. So personnel costs, of course, nobody likes to include these in the project because they're high. And I don't know what to say about that. I don't know how to get them lower. The fact is that it just costs us a lot of money to acquire property. When we're looking at the project, doing research on the project can be very time consuming. If there's access control, access research, owner searches, those kind of things just take time. It's getting harder and harder to find contact information for owners also. I don't know if anybody else is finding that, but because people are going away from landlines, phone books don't do you any good anymore. And everybody has a cell phone and they don't want it listed. So searching for contact information is really hard. You have to set up files and order preliminary title reports and then review those preliminary title reports. You have to get appraisals, whether we're appraising in-house or we're contracting it out. That takes a lot of time to go with those appraisers. A lot of times we need estimates, especially if there's signs on the property. That sign has to be estimated individually. There could be other estimates. If there's a ton of landscaping in the area, we may need a landscaping estimate also. We haven't talked about condemnation. Nobody likes to talk about condemnation, but it's a necessity in our job to keep our projects online. We do our best not to have to condemn. Region 3 has the lowest condemnation rate in the state. And that says a lot for our agents, as we do our best to make sure that we come to an agreement with the property owner that's fair to both them and to the state. And then of course, closing takes time also, but we have to pay the people who were so graciously to let us buy their property. So then that brings us to the scoping spreadsheet that was looked at a little bit, and you just need to fill it out as much as you can. Include any risks and assumptions. Those are very important. What we see a lot of times with our scoping estimates is we'll scope something. That project will finally come up to bid. They've budgeted us for what we scope. We do a new estimate and our estimate may be higher. Normally, that's because the project has changed somewhere in between. Or land values have just skyrocketed. We've seen land values go up, but we do try to take that into consideration when we're doing our estimate. The biggest problem that we have is that when I scoped this, I only scoped it for 1 mile, but the project got some extra funds somewhere, so now they want to do 2 miles. So by keeping this information in here and making sure you're putting in a lot of assumptions and risks, you prevent that from becoming too much of an issue, because you can just say, hey, when I scoped it, this is what we looked at. Now that you want more, it's going to cost you more. But that gives a good thing there for that. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Jane, and she's going to talk about some of the things that we run into when we're out scoping projects.
One quick question. I heard, maybe it was just a rumor or whatever, that before you guys start acquiring property, let's say on Allen Creek, do we need an authorization to condemn before you can even start acquiring property?
We need an authorization from FHWA that gives us the money. And once we have the money, then we can acquire. We cannot acquire anything until we have the money.
So there's nothing that under threat of condemnation, you don't even have to start that until somebody says they don't want to?
Yeah, so the threat of condemnation, we don't start that. The property owner is given a minimum of 40 days after we present them with the offer. So they have 40 days to either accept or reject the offer. Okay, that 40 days just flies by, let me tell you. And they haven't even looked at it yet. So in the meantime, we need to be contacting them, working with them, figuring out where we can come to an agreement. Sometimes they just go, not dealing with you, send me to court. Okay, that doesn't happen very, very often, as much as you'd like it to, because it sure would make things easier for us. We just finally have to come to an impasse. And when we come to an impasse that we're not getting anywhere, we have offered them more money, they're demanding more money, we can't meet, then that's when we finally have to file for condemnation. It's usually done as late in the process as we can, but 17 weeks before bid. Because they have to have 17 weeks to get possession after we do it. And then they file and it all becomes DOJ's problem and we don't work with them much anymore.
No way that's specific. If you're gonna use federal funds to purchase right away, you guys can use local funds, which would follow the MAP 21 process, which I don't know if you guys are gonna talk about using
MAP
local
21.
funds,
Oh.
using MAP 21 funds or anything.
Uh-uh.
Yeah, so you would still need to follow the uniform process, but you would not be obligating any federal funds in the right of way phase. You still have to identify all of those funds that you're gonna be using with local funds in the actual phase, but you're not actually asking for federal obligation.
But if it's on a project using federal funds, it still has to follow. It doesn't matter what funds you're using.
You,
for right
you
of
still
way.
have to follow, you would still be using our consultants or, and you would still be getting approval and oversight from the right of way section.
Yeah, you
But
still
you
have to
do
follow
not
the-
have to have federal obligation because you're not obligating any money for that phase from the federal government.
But you still have to follow the uniform.
Correct.
Yeah. The
And,
other
and each one of those times, just so you guys know, you have to get approval to move that forward. It's not just, oh, we're always gonna use MAP 21. We would have to discuss it and make sure that.
What are you
it's
referring to with the MAP 21? That's a federal bill.
correct. And if MAP 21 allowed you to use federal or use local funds to
For right of
purchase.
way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but we have a lot of things we have to go to. We can only use those funds. The only time MAP 21 falls in place for us is if NEPA is not done yet. And it grants us to start earlier, because normally we have to wait for NEPA, but it will give us permission to start before NEPA is done. The other thing that I didn't add is when you're using federal funds, marijuana dispensaries or marijuana grows, can't use federal funds on any of those. So you have to, we get asked every time we submit an estimate, they say, are there any dispensaries or marijuana grows?
It's hemp too.
Hemp is the other one.
No, hemp was excluded 3 years ago.
Hemp is now part of it.
Yeah, it's agriculture.
Hemp is one where you need to have state funding.
What do you consider a grow? Like one or two plants or like a farm thing?
That's a good question.
It can be either, honestly.
Okay.
It can be either. If they come out and say,
This is my.
this is my pot farm, you can't be there and they only have 2 plants. I don't care. I don't care if they have them in their front yard when you walk up there. It's marijuana. We cannot buy it with,
Federal funds.
and we're not talking affecting the property. We're talking buying anywhere on the
Any
property.
part of it.
If you have a mini mall and the mini mall has one tenant that is a dispensary, you now have to use state funds on that mini mall, even though they don't own it. Property owner doesn't own it, doesn't make any difference. You still can't use state funds on it.
But it's hemp as well, because we got that. guidance.
Federal funds, which keeps in state
Yeah.
funds, but she means your funds.
Well, and also if you're working with a property owner and there's something that's called speculation. And so if you're working with a property owner and that property owner says, well, right now I'm thinking about growing some hay because this happened to me on a project. I'm going to grow hay. No, I'm going to put some cows on it. Well, in the end, he ended up growing hemp or marijuana. It was in greenhouses. But during the time that you're having it appraised, you can't have it appraised, or if you're scoping, you can't say, well, one day maybe they might grow hemp or marijuana. You have to go with what you have at the present time. And the same thing with an appraisal. If an appraiser is out there, they'll appraise it based on what they see on day of inspection. So I love examples. And when Shade and I were talking about putting together the slideshow, I thought, it'd be kind of nice to show some of the examples that we've worked with. And, you know, it's a fine art to scope. I mean, a lot of it, you just have to kind of guess, you know? But this is a project. This is Highway 62 in the first slide. And this is a sidewalk project. We're going to widen. There's practically no bike lanes out here. And there are no sidewalks. And what do you hear from property owners when you're talking about putting in sidewalks?
There's no bikes or side people.
We don't have pedestrians out here. Well, it's funny, when you start taking pictures, you start noticing pedestrians. And maybe pedestrians aren't walking out there because there's really not a place to walk. It's kind of a little bit sketchy. So this is a part of the project. We did a mile-long project in Shady Cove, sidewalk, curbs, gutter, bike lanes. And so you look at it when you're scoping and you go, oh my gosh, how do we fit in the improvements? I mean, you look at this, you see signs and power poles and fences. And a lot of this is going to be most likely on the property owner's property. For this project, we looked at the utility poles and said anything to the right of the utility poles going to be property owner. We're going to have to figure that out. And anything to the left is probably our state right of way. But then you also have to ask the question, okay, if we're going to be putting in sidewalk, curb and gutter, where are we going to move these improvements? Because when it comes down to putting in sidewalks versus working with a business, what do you think the business owner is interested in? How they're going to continue to make their businesses thrive. They could care less about the pedestrians. Now, once the project was done, people loved the sidewalk, curb and gutter. I mean, they're very happy with it. But when you're scoping, you really, really have to just kind of look at, you know, what are we going to be up against? You know, the second photo or the second picture is a motel. And that little fenced in area is where the gentleman would have his guests sit outside and enjoy coffee. So here it is sitting in the path of our sidewalk that we want to put in. And so you have to address that. In the end, I believe what we did is we made the area smaller, but it was still workable. This project is in, I mean, this picture is in Grants Pass. We were doing ADA ramps, sidewalk improvements. And, you know, you talk about temporary easements. Well, sometimes when you're scoping, you don't know that this fence happened to be in the right of way. And if you look at the stake, and this happened after the fact, you'll see that that fence was just in the right of way. And we cannot have any improvements in our right of way. So we had to work with the property owner to have the fence moved. But one thing to think about when Shaden was talking with you about temporary construction easements, think about that for the improvements you're putting in. If you didn't know one way or another if this gate or this fence was in the right of way, would you need to be able to have it moved to put in your improvements? Or could you get a temporary construction easement? You'll have to protect those improvements within the temporary construction easement. And if you can't, then you have to think about purchasing them. The next photo is in Shady Cove again. And you'll notice this sign that advertises for the market, and it has kind of a reader board and it advertises for a liquor store, but then the Oregon Lottery. And this happened to be in an area where we needed to purchase right of way. And we at ODOT, we don't allow signs in the right of way. It's just not allowed, or any improvements. And so this sign had to be moved, or we call it reestablished. And so where do you move it? And again, we're talking about, you know, very narrow places to move things. On top of it, we found out that the sign is not up to code. So if you're going to affect an improvement with your project, then you have to think about when you get ready to make an offer to the property owner, it's your project that affected the sign that's no longer in code. So you get a sign appraisal and you make sure that you're addressing all of that. Does this meet code? If it doesn't, what's the price of a new sign? If it's something that can be moved, if it's code, what are the costs to move it, including permits, power, and so on?
One other thing about signs is if you hit, like we hit a Dairy Queen in Gold Beach, and the Dairy Queen, it had been there forever, had an old Dairy Queen sign. Well, when we hit the Dairy Queen, they wouldn't let us reestablish that sign. They said, you're going to put a new Dairy Queen sign up because that's old. You're using our old trademark. Now we want the new one. So they required us to have a new sign put up.
That wouldn't have come under SHPA?
Yeah. It wasn't that old.
They've been around a while.
Yeah.
And one other thing on the sign. If you, with the way signs work, if for some reason, well, for example, this one, it's not within code, then you know that the property owner isn't going to want that sign. So then you're going to have to figure out who's going to be taking that sign down, because, you know, you have to account for it somewhere in your project cost. And think about that. What would it take to take that sign down? And if it has power to it, the only person or company that can disconnect the power is a licensed electrician.
Or the property owner.
Or the property owner, if it's their sign. Okay, the next photo, double check the scope. Historic properties, I believe Doug spoke to this, and Shaden. Historic properties, you know, if you can avoid it, avoid it. And for this project in Grants Pass at one time, and I think it was before we realized it was historic, maybe we knew it was historic, but we were going to do a T-par through it, where we'd have pedestrians walking through the grassy area while we were working on sidewalks, because you have to have a methodology for pedestrians to be able to move about and, you know, not get within the project. So after we realized some of the issues with using a historic property or some of the things that were affected, the idea to use it was abandoned, and we found another way to do it. So just put that on your radar. Beautiful building, beautiful area. If you have to do it, you have to do it. If you don't, try to avoid it. And then the next photo, ensuring all scope is considered. This is Coleman Creek. We have a bridge project out there that's being constructed currently, and it's out in the Phoenix area. You look at it and you think, okay, well, this is a sidewalk curb gutter project. Gee, how much room do we need for sidewalk, curb, and gutter? But there's something else that you need to be considering, and that is within the creek, because this is fish bearing, you have to have something that's called a tributary easement. And that's a temporary easement that allows our environmental folks to go into the creek further up and make sure that they can monitor any environmental issues. And it typically runs the same time as our other temporary easements. So from the time the property owner signs, it's usually 3 to 4 years on our projects. It's at least 3 years. It can go up to 4 and sometimes 5, just depending on the complexity of the project. And then remember to include everyone. Okay, so you look at this. This is out on Blackwell Road. It's an agricultural area, and the fencing happens to be something that would keep livestock in. And so if you didn't know that, and you just looked at it and you said, well, gee, you know, this is what we need for scoping, but are you considering that it is for livestock? Because are you keeping in mind that there's cows or livestock of some sort that's on the property? And that's really important, because fencing is handled a little bit differently in that the property owner, if the appraiser addresses that fencing needs to be replaced and it is livestock fencing, then it's one of those where you either use it or you lose it. And so that's usually captured in the appraisal, but if you're scoping, you probably want to make a note of that. The way we look at livestock is we want the livestock kept off the highways because we want to protect the traveling public. The way that property owners look at it is, hey, these are my livestock. I don't want them out on the road. I don't want them to get killed or hurt, you know, horses, whatever, what have you. So there's a common interest there. And these are my last 3. Shady Cove is the first one. Detailed scoping notes, very, very important. And as Shaden alluded to, risk, so important that, I mean, if you don't consider risk and at least try to accomplish capturing that risk in your notes, it's just crucial. It really is, because it can be so costly. In this particular photo, this is an RV park, and it was established many years ago. But one thing that we noticed is that some of the spaces could be in our right-of-way. And it doesn't show that they're in the right-of-way at the very beginning, but as you walk back, you can see where the property owner had been using some of the right-of-way for their RV spots. And so we had to work with them on moving them. I mean, it's just something that we just don't allow. Second one, pay attention to the smallest details, like Shaden said. you're probably gonna miss something. And honestly, during scoping, we missed this, but we sure found it out later. And if you look at this little marker, we said, what is that? Who does it belong to? It's in our right of way. It's a mile marker. It's an old mile marker. This used to be Highway 99. And so when we worked with our district office, they wanted to keep it to be able to display it. And it's really kind of neat, you know, it's pretty nostalgic. And finally, private utilities are important to scoping. This is again on Blackwell Road, private utility pole, well house with a well. After speaking with the property owner, we realized the private utility pole was no longer in use. It hadn't been for ages, and the well hadn't worked in years. But if you are working near a well, and you know that it's something that your improvements are going to come close to the well, think about having it tested. Have it tested, and then, before the project, and then after the project is completed, have it tested again. Because you're going to kind of cover yourself in so that you won't have the property owner coming back and saying, well, my well doesn't work, and I think it's because of your construction, and I really don't like that. And now you're going to have to drill a new well for me. If you have the documentation, it's going to cover you. And that is a huge risk. And the only other thing I was going to mention is keep in mind that when you're scoping and you're getting ready to do your sketch maps, if something changes, you have to work with all disciplines. We work with environmental very closely. We work with roadway. We work with hydraulics. I mean, one little thing can have a domino effect and change things. So one thing to remember is once the DAP, design acceptance phase, once the footprint is set, if something changes after that, it's going to require a revision. And, if there's something you didn't account for, and a revision means that you have to go back and get it approved by the OTC, or for us, the OTC, and then you kind of start over again. And that can be very time consuming. And if you've already had an appraisal, sometimes you have to have it reappraised. So that's it.
Thank you both very much.
Any questions?
You've been following this.
You didn't put the first part of in your agenda.
I
kind of following it. We're getting there.
So 2 right-of-way stories while they're getting set up. The state of Florida requires 3 assessments or appraisements, and then at the end of it, they'll give you the full market value and a list of 10 lawyers you may call to sue the state, and the state pays for it. I'm not making this up. And you can tell this happened multiple times. You can see a road going down the path and it's doing that. That was the homeowner that said, no, I want more. And they've been doing that for 30 years now. Why? I don't know. In Texas, which is amazing because that state has sued the federal government more than any other state. In the 1990s, they adopted fully the federal requirements for right-of-way acquisition. However, and for any project, local, state, or federal, state law, you have to follow the federal regulations. However, they're a little loose on the implementation and requiring of that, because one county I worked in was pushing for an extension of tollway. And I'd given this presentation because I didn't know it at the time. I was new to Texas, that Texas has this rule, this law. And so I let my board know, and I was told afterwards, nah, we don't have to do that. No, it's in the law. No, we go to this guy and we say, please donate your right of way, and we'll put in an interchange. And if he says no, we go to the next guy. They donate the right of way real quick because they want that interchange.
Okay, Dan's going to go over one of the other items that we've seen kind of a lot with our projects that have been somewhat underfunded. So these are particularly ones that are currently in the STIP that could be used as examples. And then I'll have Dan, take over.
Okay, yeah, since I came into this position and picked up some of the projects that were already underway, some of them ran into some challenges and not enough funding common. And so looking back at how some of that happened, I'm really glad to see we're taking a focused effort here with scoping and creating a good estimate, because that was something that you guys probably didn't get enough guidance with in the past and created some of those situations. So we're doing our part to try to make that better and create a better project to begin with. And in looking at that, historically, the projects that we did with the local agencies were put together and they landed with us as ready to take off with PE and start design work. Yeah, we just have these typical phases, PE for design, right away, utility relocation and construction. Other phase would come in if we had some rail issue or possibly some plantings or something. And in looking at that, it's really critical to have that estimate and the scope well-defined up front. So once we would get a funded project, it lands in the STIP and we would start to run the project. Well, that was all based on the foundational documents we had from scoping and any environmental that had been done, if much at all. As you can see from what we shared today, there's a lot of complexities and a lot of issues that goes into both environmental and right-of-way up front that can really affect what the project is going to cost. So we don't have those captured up front. Our estimate's not going to be as good as it could be. So, so with that is, once we have that project in the STIP, we'll come to you and based on those documents, we'll create an IGA that really spells out mostly about the funding of the project, where the fund's coming from, who's paying how much of a match, what the percentages are. And one of the key elements is who's going to cover the overruns if we don't have enough funding in the project. And the way those IGAs are structured is the local is going to be responsible for those overruns. So if we miss the mark up front with our estimate and we get halfway into the project and realize that, hey, we're going to be way short on funding, then that becomes a huge issue. And I've had to work with some of the local agencies to go find more money midstream in the project. And, you know, hindsight, looking back, what could we learn to make this better was a better effort at estimating up front. And so give you guys the tools to do that, and hopefully we can avoid some of that. So when we get to that point after the IGA, we're going to obligate the funding with FHWA. Now, that's a step that we do that you don't necessarily see, but what we're doing at that point is we're going to FHWA and saying, okay, we've got the federal funds on this project. We've got it defined. We've got it funded. We're going to go forward. We're going to build the project. So they assume that we have checked all the boxes, answered all the questions, and that we know what we're doing on the project, and that we're going to be able to build it for what we have available to do the project. And it also establishes timelines. Used to, once we obligated PE, is we had 10 years to actually get that to construction. That recently changed and is extended, but the right-of-way is still a key element too, that you, once you obligate that, the clock is running to actually get the project delivered. So that goes back to FHWA assumes there's no unknown questions here. We've crossed all of our T's, dotted all of our I's, and we have a project to run. So what happens if we get a project that a local agency wants to do and doesn't quite have the funding for the whole project, or knows that they're going to need more funding later, and we still have a significant amount of work to do? And you can see from this the level of effort for accurate scoping to build a good estimate with is probably a lot more extensive than what we've done in the past. So it kind of presents a challenge. And with that, we had a recent project that was kind of in this situation. Couple of things is the project had been awarded, but it was really kind of, the funding was there just for design. And we weren't sure how we were going to get the funding for construction. Usually we don't want to do that unless we're really planning to do that up front. But this was a project that we were kind of under some pressure. Let's get PE started and get the project going. Well, there were a lot of variables. The footprint of the project changed from what it was originally awarded as. It extended, got quite a bit larger, and come to find out, it's next to a creek. And there's going to be a lot of water quality issues that come up in the project. How we're going to deal with that. We had some park properties that you could see from the right of way potentially created significant issues. So it was talking with them. We were hesitant to start the PE phase with all these unknowns. We were still really developing the project instead of starting into design on the project. So that was something that came up. It was new to me, and we hadn't done it much in Region 3, but it's been used elsewhere in the state. And that is to utilize a planning phase. Now, when this came up and I first mentioned it, everybody's reaction was a planning phase in our project. And it's not the planning work that you might be thinking of in a typical planning study or something that one of the local agencies would be doing, or that your planning staff would be involved in. They're probably not much into roadway design. But with this is we actually have another phase available that we can do prior to PE that affords the local agency and the project time to thoroughly develop and answer a lot of those questions that might be up there for a project that isn't fully defined yet. And if there's those unknowns that I mentioned, like in this other project, is they were so unknown that we couldn't really come up with a good estimate to even try to get the funding to go forward with PE. So little about the planning phase and what that offers us is it really gives it, I guess the best way to think of it as a pre-PE effort and an actually funded project development effort is what we're doing in the planning phase. So it's specific just to the project that is at hand there, but we can actually utilize that funding that we got for the project and work through this, develop the project, and work on different aspects, the environmental, the right of way, and really help understand what the challenges are in the project, how costly they're going to be. Do we have a way we could design around them? And big thing is we land with a good estimate after we've been through this process that, you know, instead of trying to go forward with a $2 million project and finding out it's really going to cost $4 million while we're in the middle of design. And everybody has to scramble and try to solve that problem. This one gives us the ability to really sort through that and say, hey, guess what? This was a $4 million project, not a $2 million project. So that gives us the ability then that when we can get more funding into the project and go forward with it, we know it's going to be fully funded and we shouldn't have any more surprises. We shouldn't have any hiccups, and we have a path to build a successful project. So that pre-PE phase is kind of a way to think of it, because we can actually take all the design efforts up to about 30% plans, kind of a draft DAP, if you're familiar with the ODOT nomenclature. So we can actually be working on design and trying to come up with certain parts of this and answer those questions. And like we saw in all this, some of the environmental efforts is we could get through that and identify what's going to be costly, what can we avoid. And we can also work on getting the part 3 completed that Doug was talking about. So we do all that ahead of time. And then also you can identify some of those right-of-way issues, identify those historic properties, and again, either decide how you're going to deal with that or find a way to just go around it so it doesn't become a big cost issue for the project. And you can also go through and try different cross sections and evaluate those. And you can, you'll see we can actually have open houses. City councils, county commissioners can weigh in on that and really help define what that project is going to be if you didn't have all that up front, or if you need to accommodate certain issues that came up, maybe not in the original scoping. So it gives us a chance to really, like I said, develop the project. The open houses, input, and what that really does to benefit the project is that you're going to be doing the project development with a funded consultant, just as you would in the design phase. But there are a couple of key elements here that make this unique and beneficial is you get to do that. Your PE phase, when you actually get to that point and move forward with that, will be a much better defined project. So you know what you're actually trying to build at that point. And this really helps us minimize amendments throughout the project. When we have to go back and add funding, change scope, make all kinds of adjustments, those can be very time consuming in the process, anywhere from 3 to 6 months on some of those. So depending on what your deadlines are and trying to keep the project moving, if we keep having all these changes and moving goalposts, is we can get really tied up just in the administrative part of this, keeping the funding and the scope of the project in line. So the key benefit, probably the biggest one here, is we can move the project forward. We can do that development. We can answer those questions. But with the planning phase, if we get into this to a point where we see that this isn't going to be viable, or there's going to be a lot more time required for the agency to get the funding to actually build this project, is it doesn't have the clock running like we started a PE phase. That obligation to FHWA is it gives you the opportunity to answer all these questions, line the project up accurately, or you might find that the project's not viable. And at that point, if that's where you landed, is everybody can go up to the end of the planning phase and just say, this project isn't viable. And that's a perfectly acceptable use of the funds. And you don't have anything to go forward after that.
No requirement to pay back the funds used for the planning phase. So
Right.
For the RVMPO, you're allowed to apply for a planning phase. I think the minimum requirement we put on that was 150,000. The middle road might want to consider that. Because it's the two benefits, main benefits, is you get a good scope of what the project actually will be. And if it isn't viable and you decide not to proceed, you don't have to pay the money back. You get to engineering and you stop, you got to pay the money back.
Right. Yeah, we get, and I've been in a couple of those projects that we were well into the PE phase and utilizing those funds, and things weren't quite working out or lining up to see the project go forward. And it's some tough decisions were made. It's like, $750,000 spent on PE, and we don't think we're going to go forward, then it's like, how are we going to pay that money back? So this gives you some flexibility and some options to sort through a project, really answer those questions and get it well defined and really dial in that estimate. So when you go forward, you have a really good chance of succeeding and carrying the project through. So that's something that I hadn't seen on the projects I inherited when I got into this, and came across a couple with that challenge, and Justin shared that with us and said, hey, this might be a good solution. So we're going to try to implement that on several projects and utilize it to benefit everybody.
Hello, Dan.
Yes.
Are you able to hear me? This is Mike Combs.
Hey, Mike.
Couple of questions. Hey, I think it's likely we're going to submit a planning project this round into MPO. Just sort of understand, you talked about it briefly, but I'd like to ask a couple of more detailed questions about what really is in a planning project scope. You talked about getting to about 30% design or DAP level. So there's some level of environmental done, but I presume you do not submit permits as part of planning. Is that a correct statement?
That is correct. This would,
Okay, and
it would help identify any potential big issues on the project.
okay. Of course, the issue is you might have a programmatic that's going to expire before you actually get back to it, and all kinds of things change sometimes. But and no right of way as a part. You might identify all the right of way, but no right of way purchase as a part of a planning phase. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, you would have to wait till the NEPA was done for the right of way.
But it would help you identify any issues with
Yes.
right away.
Getting the maps and descriptions, just as Jane and Shaden were talking about, is just identifying those historic properties. Maybe just looking at it, you might not have thought it was historic to begin with, but find some of those attachments in there that would drive some of your project development and, maybe avoiding that property or just finding another way to address it.
Mike, you could pull title reports, but you're gonna have to pull title reports again when you actually turn the descriptions in. If you're using federal funds, right?
Okay. All right. So then, I haven't heard any guidance on how you put together an estimate for what this is going to cost. Is that going to come, or is that something, if we think we want to do one, we talk to you about?
Yeah, I would do it a case by case, because if you're wanting to do full survey, or if you guys are gonna do, those are the types of things that you can talk directly to one of us. Because we probably
Okay.
have enough documentation where we've done something similar, or at least we could pull specific costs for certain areas.
So here's a question. If they're doing a planning study, do they still need to do this?
No.
I'm holding up the cost estimating tool, Mike, so.
I mean,
you're doing
I don't think that the cost estimating tool is technically required, is it, by our applications?
For construction projects. It is. But
Yeah,
we
Yeah, but that cost estimator,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say that cost estimator is for a construction project.
Right.
So it didn't make sense that you would try to use that for a planning project.
Right, and we kind of left it up in the air as to how we're going to come up with the estimates for planning projects as well as rank any planning projects. So the tax is going to have a good time with that if we do have multiple planning projects to worry about.
Mike, we have enough documentation to show if you guys want to do public outreach, we have individual contracts with that. We have survey specifically, we can work with Logan, and Logan can go out there or just look aerially just to, I doubt we need to do topo, but we could just do boundary surveys. So we would know the cost for doing that. So it'd just be something to reach out to one of the TPMs and we could work through that cost.
Okay. Okay. Well, I would think you would need to do topo, because how do you get to a 30% design without topo?
Yeah, we could actually have those itemized.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Dan, I believe we can also apply for just PE and right-of-way phases without doing a full construction project. Is that right, Carl?
I don't think so. I think if you get the PE and you do not intend to complete the project, is that what or you want to do it phase by phase?
We were planning to apply for the PE now and then probably the next round. That's for.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm pretty pretty sure there's no federal regulations.
Just means you are committing to building the
Yeah.
project no matter what.
Yeah, that you will have to make sure that your city council is aware that this is not a one-time deal and it's okay, we don't build it. No, if you're gonna do PE, you gotta go forward with the project or pay the PE back.
Within how many years?
You have to go and obligate construction once you turn on right away. You have 20 years from the time that your IGA was signed.
IGA's something signed.
Yep.
So your IGA is signed, then you do PE. It
You
takes a year
you
or
have to have
two,
20
then-
years by the time
It's only 10.
I think it's
The right-
10 from PE to right away to construction.
they've changed the rules. Yeah, they just recently, 20 years now. FHWA just.
They like the 20 years number. 20 years is also the amount of time a construction project is considered viable, that if you have to redo anything to it.
That was part of the IIJA. Now, when that money runs out, they may go back to the 10 and 20, but right now it's the floating PE time is the same as the right of way.
Well, you should take into consideration also, if it proves that you don't build it, then if the property owner asks for their land back,
You lose the
you
money.
have to give it to them. And so,
Yeah, every federal project has a 20-year horizon. Buses are different. But for construction projects, you have a 20-year horizon. If you do anything to that or do not complete the project within 20 years, money is owed back. And that was FDA as well.
There'll definitely be more questions from FHWA because they're not gonna be in construction phase that's been put into the STIP, because they're only gonna see a right of way in PE phase.
Yeah.
They're immediately gonna ask, how are you financially constraining your project? And so then that's where
If we haven't
you
funded
would
it,
probably need to share a document with us, and it need to be signed by the council that you guys are going to build this project if it costs $100 million.
yeah, here's the problem with that, Carl. If it's not currently in the long-range plan, the RTP, and you're planning to do a TIP amendment, you can't do that.
You have to put it in.
That we were considering is.
I mean, there's some big projects in there in the RTP that say, ODOT has one in there. We have 199, it's $40 or $50 million, and we can't do that. in this segment. So the city has those same long-range projects with large dollar amounts in there. And even if they didn't, then we could look at updating the RTP.
We'd have to get some guidance from the feds for fiscal constraint. Because if it's in the TIP, it's gotta be fiscally constrained. And if it's a project not in the long range plan, we have to put it in the long range plan, but the whole project has to be fiscally constrained. Now, they've given some leeway in the last 3 bills. The feds have given some leeway in that. It took MPOs 40 years to convince the federal government that since the RTP, the long range plan, is a moving window every 4 years, at some point in time, you're going to have a project towards the end of that window that's just going to be starting, right? So in that case, that's PE or right of way. So depending on when you're going after that, we might be able to show fiscal constraint, but they really got snaky after map 21 on some of that stuff. They kind of drew back some of the allowances. So
it is doable.
This one is an RTP.
Okay.
What if you're just doing?
We're good.
What if you're just doing a phasing project then?
What do you mean by phasing?
Or
Do
the
you want 2
phase-
different
Or not,
construction?
well, excuse me, planning phase.
Planning does not have to be in the RTP because there is no assumption that you will complete that project after you get the PE.
All right. Any other questions before we move on to the next section? I can make this pretty quick. I can
Yeah,
also
hopefully.
talk really, really fast. All right, so the standard mistakes and issues to avoid. Number one is PE not being correctly funded. That's one of our number one issues because none of us can move any of the contracts forward if I can't hire a consultant. So if we come back and our PE contract should have been $1 million and we only put $100,000 in PE, I cannot move anything forward until the STIP actually has and shows $1 million in there before I can actually start a consultant contract. That's one of our biggest problems and one of the most time consuming issues that we have. I don't know what the piece about the consultant is, and local costs. If local costs specifically are federally reimbursable, typically you guys are so overmatched, we never suggest that you guys actually ask for what we call 421 reimbursement, because all of your projects have been so overmatched, it doesn't make any sense to ask us to process payment and charge you to give your money back, because we have to project charge on everything we do. So if you have any other questions about that, I can explain that after the meeting. Timelines for IGAs. 3 to 6 months for something that's pretty cookie cutter, and we all know exactly what it's supposed to look like. Obviously, it's going to go more from there if you have multiple jurisdictions signing documents. If we have any issues with the funding, if we ask, if you have a project that's going to have more overmatch, we may ask for a document like an MOU of some sort that says, yes, I have that document before we actually put it in the LGIP. Procurement takes minimum of 6 months for a full service contract. We just went through one with Grants Pass. It was probably 9 months from the beginning to end. And so the reasoning for that time is, we have to have an RFP that's correct. We have to have the negotiations back and forth. We use a mini solicitation, which already has all the task work in there. We can go through and find exactly what you guys need for your actual work order contract. And then it goes into negotiations. Really, we're only negotiating hours with the consultants because their rates are already decided. And so that's where the negotiation component comes from it. And that's where we bring in our ODOT technicians to also say, like, we have an independent cost estimate, and that's what we would compare to make sure that the consultants weren't heavily putting into a certain amount of time into a certain area that they shouldn't. I personally like to use a lot of contingency tasks because it avoids amendments. If you put a contingencies in a lot of our contracts, it does cost more upfront, but the amount of time that you're going to save in doing amendments by either amending the STIP or amending your actual work order contract, which also takes up to 3 months, is typically saved as long as you put it in as a contingency task in our work order contracts.
What percentage per task should they consider?
There's really no percentage. Every project is going to be case by case, and that's where somebody like myself, Dan, or Eli has been doing these projects. And if you know that there's going to be issues with your DAP phase because you haven't gone to your council, and because you don't know if you're going to want 6-foot sidewalks versus 8-foot sidewalks, you typically would want to put some contingency because you may have to have another meeting. Your consultants may have to show up to when we actually itemize how many meetings they're going to show up. So you could put additional meetings, 2 or 3 meetings, you divide that by the meetings, you add those 2 by percentage. So each task, that's where you're evaluating your risk. That's typically where you want to look to put your contingencies. I think most of the expectations here outlined is that we're trying to give you a tool. It's morphable. We can add more of the ODOT pages to it to help you guys. So we can do that at any time. It's just one of the things that we're trying to make sure that we are utilizing everybody's time more efficiently, because we have a lot of projects in the STIP right now that just haven't moved yet because, in our opinion, they were very underscoped and there are funding problems with them. And before we can even start moving them, we need to put the money so that we can actually kick the projects off.
How many of those are from the MPO, and do we have a list of those?
Yes, all. No, just kidding. Yeah, we could do that. I mean,
Well, I mean, if we're going to consider funding for projects and we have projects already in the TIP that are underfunded.
So,
might wanna
I mean,
talk about
yes,
that
we
in
have a
the tax
list.
about-
Yeah, we have a list. I mean, we could pull up the STIP and just click on any of them that says local agency delivered. I mean, we have ones that are STIP projects that have delivery of the whole project in a single year. That includes planning, construction, you know, and obviously that's impossible to do.
We would not have put it in the STIP that way.
It's in that way.
Okay.
Join the meeting. If we're to talk about, jump down to the technical scoping sheet, which used to be part 1 and 2, that is a document that after it is selected and put into, after your project is selected, we use that document to build the IGA. We use that document for the future PCRs. And so when you guys are selected for a project, then we can go directly to that scoping sheet. It's very similar, a lot of cut and paste of the application. But any of the TPMs will help you guys fill that out. It's also kind of another check of the scoping document where if, you know, that's where we can start identifying moving money, possibly having more money in PE versus having it right away. Those are the types of things that we would negotiate in the scoping sheet. So hopefully that was fast enough. Any other quick questions or on any projects or filling any of this stuff out?
We lost quite a few people, but we have them online. Anybody online have any questions?
Silence because everybody fell asleep.
Anybody here have any questions?
And most of you know how to get a hold of me.
Well, we'll get all 4 of your names.
Yes, we answer our
5
emails
or
as
6.
fast as we can. So,
And
and,
we'll,
and we are the conduit to the other technicians. So, you know, we're kind of the face of ODOT for you guys to reach out to. So if we need to get Doug involved, I'll you know, bring Doug into any of the conversation. Same with the right-of-way section.
well, thank you all very much for
Carl,
coming.
For the middle road MPO to consider adding a planning option.
We can have
would be
that
a recommendation from the
discussion.
TAC to
We can go straight to the policy with that. The TAC, yeah, the TAC was last week. So yeah, we'll put that on the agenda as a discussion item.
Other than that, that's all I got.
Thank all of you for showing up, for giving us your presentation and answering the questions. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
And for everybody,
Commissioner Brown will be pleased.
we'll find a way to put this whole meeting on our website so you can go back and listen to certain parts of it if need be. And we'll put it on both websites.
Yeah, thank you to all the ODOT presenters. Very, very useful.